In taking up the struggle against white chauvinism, white comrades often have a defense or a number of defenses they use in order to keep from addressing the criticism. They view the criticisms as unjust attacks rather than political criticisms meant to move comrades in the entire process forward. These comrades are making a choice between white chauvinism and Marxism-Leninism. It is their white chauvinism and refusal to struggle against it that leads them to use these defenses. They are saying to us that the struggle for multinational unity in our movement and in the working class will have to be abandoned if it means they're breaking the conspiracy of white chauvinism. They are saying that they think it's correct to maintain the present composition of our movement. They are saying that they view themselves as having a stake in white chauvinism. Deflecting the criticism of white chauvinism is very common in our movement. This is expressed in several ways. Comrades raise mitigating circumstances that led to their making the error. I was tired, I had my mind on something else, I was confused, I didn't understand, I didn't know about that, etc. Comrades raise other factors that liquidate the error of white chauvinism. It was primarily an error of idealism, ultra-leftism, a right error, sexism, bad vibes, etc. Comrades raise the method of struggle rather than speak to the criticism. You comrades are being mean and hard, or this method of struggle is incorrect. Rather than speaking to the criticisms, comrades say we have to deal with the more important items on the agenda and take up the white chauvinism some other time. Comrades talk about all the errors that could be made in taking up the struggle against white chauvinism. While the comrade receiving the criticism may use deflection, other comrades may use it in order to shield or protect the comrade from what he/she considers an unnecessarily harsh criticism. But the shielding and protecting is not just for the comrade receiving the criticism. It is also protecting those who participate in deflecting. It is protecting those who participate in the conspiracy of white chauvinism. Comrades across the country have used unprincipled methods of struggle and incorrect process as a means to deflect the criticism. When these criticisms are raised, they should be carefully examined for any truth in the criticism and whether it is a cover for a comrade's white chauvinism. What we have seen with the comrades who raise it is that they are using it as a way to protect themselves from the criticism. When a comrade says the method of criticism is unprincipled, what does that mean? It means that a principle of Marxism-Leninism has been violated, that the approach is opportunist. However, the comrades who raise the criticisms don't show how in fact the approach is opportunist and therefore liquidates the struggle against racism. They don't address the criticism made of them honestly and forthrightly and then go on to show how the opportunist method is placing an obstacle to the struggle against racism. Instead of addressing the criticism and trying to move the process forward by struggling against the opportunist liquidation of the struggle against racism, they raise a counter-criticism as a means to hold up the process and avoid addressing the criticism. We must ask then, who is really being opportunist? Who is really violating Marxist-Leninist principles? Those who say the process is incorrect or they don't trust the process are engaging in the same opportunism. In Baltimore, D.C. and other locales, comrades have said the process is undemocratic. Again, we should ask ourselves, what is a Marxist-Leninist critique of the process? We would place this struggle in its historical context and talk about how this is the first time the ideological struggle against racism has ever been taken in our movement. And comrades raising the criticism of incorrect process would make a self-criticism for participating in the conspiracy of white chauvinism for so long. We'd also examine what the concrete errors are in the process, and how they serve to maintain white chauvinism in our ranks and obstruct the building of multinational unity. And we'd present a rectification. Here again, comrades raising this criticism have not critiqued the process from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. Instead, they have used this criticism as a cover for their own white chauvinism. They have not looked concretely at what has held back the struggle, and placed those errors in the context of how they maintain the conspiracy of white chauvinism. They have not presented a better process that will help us overcome white chauvinism. Instead, They have said the incorrect process is what led to their not addressing the criticism or their resigning from the local center. We must ask ourselves who's being undemocratic. Isn't it those who refuse to break with the conspiracy, speak to the criticisms, and show how to move the process forward? Those comrades use the criticism of unprincipled method and incorrect process to deflect criticisms of their white chauvinism. Comrades also use sexism to deflect criticisms of white chauvinism. In Detroit, people raised sexism as a way to liquidate the criticism of white chauvinism. They said that women's capitulation of sexism was the reason they remained silent during the first few local center meeting, not small circle mentality and white chauvinism. In Boston, close to the beginning of a discussion of white chauvinism, someone made a sexist error and the rest of the meeting was taken up discussing sexism. In Baltimore, a comrade proposed an amendment to the resolution on OCIC centers that in essence equates sexism with racism as an impediment to building the tendency. Elevating the struggle against sexism over the struggle against racism either in words or deeds liquidates the struggle against both in the final analysis. The Poaq Paper goes into how the struggle against sexism is liquidated when comrades equate racism and sexism. We'll discuss here how the struggle against racism and petty bourgeois chauvinism are liquidated. We can take an empirical approach to the question and simply look at how many women versus men and how many national minorities versus whites are in organized tendency forms. What we'll see is that there is a relatively even distribution of men and women and a grossly uneven distribution of national minority and white comrades. But a Marxist-Leninist analysis demands that we go further. We have to look at the historical development of racism and sexism as systems of oppression and the ideologies supporting those systems of oppression. We have to look at the role of each in the development of U.S. imperialism and the role of each as a tool for the ruling class to reap super profits and keep the working class divided. We have to look at the distribution of national minorities and women in the ruling class and the working class. We have to look at the interrelationship between those two forms of oppression. And we have to look at the movements of the oppressed groups and determine which have been most consistently revolutionary in character, have served to advance the entire class, and have provided the biggest threat to capital. Having done such an analysis, Marxist-Leninists will be clear that anyone who equates or elevates the struggle against sexism over the struggle against racism in effect liquidates the struggle against racism and sexism. They view it as a struggle against two equally unjust social ills, ignoring their material relationship to capital and its defeat. And for the party-building movement, we can go back to the head count and see that our movement is mostly white and petty bourgeois in makeup. We can look at the mostly petty bourgeois white women who were so quick to be champions of the struggle against sexism and ask them, where are your working class and national minority sisters? What's been your role in keeping them out of our movement? And what holds you and our entire movement back from uniting with them? Is sexism the main reason national minority and working class women are not in our movement? There is a clear example for the Midwest Regional Conference on Local Centers that draws out sharply the interrelationship between racism, petty bourgeois chauvinism, and sexism. A working-class black woman, Claudia, from Detroit had attended the .18 and National Minority Marxist-Leninist conferences, was part of the core group, and had been participating as an observer at local center meetings. She did not view herself as a Marxist-Leninist. Yet when she participated in meetings, she was very sharp, clear and often put the discussion in its proper perspective at a point when other comrades were going off on tangential and pointless arguments. At the Midwest Regional Conference, Claudia did not attend as a delegate. She did not attend as observer. But she was there. In what capacity? She catered the lunch. This is a situation where many white comrades who are particularly fond of using sexism to deflect criticisms of white chauvinism would have seized upon the opportunity to do so had Claudia been white. One such comrade, a white woman, broke with her opportunism and made a self-criticism that significantly sharpened everyone's understanding of the centrality of racism. She spoke to how she had a tendency to elevate the struggle against sexism over other struggles, and at least equate racism and sexism. Yet it didn't occur to her until then that Claudia's role at the conference had been reduced to essentially a maid or waitress, despite Claudia's history and the tendency. She further stated that if it was a petty bourgeois black woman, she probably would have seen it as a problem of sexism, though still not grasping the essence of the error, which in that instance would have been white chauvinism. These are the kinds of situations where comrades raise sexism as a way to deflect criticisms of white chauvinism. These are the kinds of situations where comrades make a choice between white chauvinism and Marxism-Leninism. Another way comrades deflect criticisms of white chauvinism is to raise criticisms of left errors. A white comrade, Bill, raised such criticisms in the Detroit local center. After the steering committee made the criticisms about comrades' silence during the first few meetings, their demands that the SC appoint members to the committees, and how it represented their small circle mentality and white chauvinism, Bill said that the criticisms were organizational questions and should not be taken up at the meeting. And besides, he thought we came here to discuss federationism and racism. In fact, he had prepared for such a discussion by reviewing the materials in the packet sent out by the SC, and in addition he read up on Harry Haywood's discussion of the phony war against white chauvinism. He wanted to talk about the left errors that could be made in the struggle against racism. This comrade was deflecting the criticism of white chauvinism. First, he reduced the criticism to an organizational question and advocated its being taken up through written exchanges rather than discussion in the local center. Then, knowing concrete criticisms of white chauvinism would be raised, he came prepared to warn everybody about potential left error. He did not address the criticisms and draw out his own white chauvinist ideology as other comrades started to do during the meeting. He wanted the discussion of the comrades to end and take it to the abstract, that way he wouldn't have to address his own racism. He didn't talk about how in Detroit all the black comrades who were members of the two circles had resigned due to the circle's racism and failure to address it, and several other independent black comrades have never joined for the same reason. He didn't talk about the right error comrades had historically made in the struggle against racism. He wanted to talk about left errors. Bill's attempt to deflect the criticism was spelled out even more clearly when he wrote a criticism of the SC. He used the parts of Black Bolshevik on the yoke and in trial and the phony war out of context to say that the SC was making left errors in the struggle against racism. What's clear from his paper is that he opposes the ideological struggle against racism. He doesn't want his own exposed. He used the criticisms of left errors not to show they serve to liquidate the struggle against racism, but to say the ideological struggle against racism must come to a halt. Comrade Inessa deflected criticisms of white chauvinism by saying that her racist errors were not based on white chauvinist ideology. Struggle had been taking place with Inessa for nearly 2 years around her multitude of racist errors and vast repertoire of defenses for those errors. The most she could do would be to say she agreed that a particular error was objectively racist, but she could never come to grips with the ideological underpinnings of her racist practice. She argued that while her errors may have been objectively racist, they were rooted in other ideological deviations like individualism and idealism. And when it comes to the struggle against white chauvinism, comrades who have held opposing views on any number of questions and have been adversaries for years, will unite in a minute. When the criticisms of Bill were raised, Inessa protested. She said it was objectively racist for him to deflect criticisms of racism in the local center, but it would be an incorrect process to identify the ideology underlying his errors. Inessa and Bill had taken opposite positions on a variety of questions for years, and it would be an understatement to say that they did not like each other personally as well. But when it come to talking about Bill's white chauvinism behind his racist errors, she came to his defense. She was maintaining the conspiracy of white chauvinism, refusing to expose Bill by deflecting criticism of each of them. Moralizing and breastbeating. Comrades feel just awful about thinking and doing such horrible things. I'm so sorry. I'm a bad person. They spill their guts about the bad things they've said and done. And they feel terrible about it. The ones who feel especially guilty want to run right to the national minority who they made the error with and apologize and make up for it. Or they wallow in self-pity, become demoralized and depressed, and begin doubting their place in the communist movement. This is an appeal for liberalism. The comrade who gets depressed and demoralized is asking other white comrades to join him/her in the conspiracy of white chauvinism and stop criticizing him/her. Moralizing and breastbeating is based on comrades' bourgeois liberalism. They see racism and white chauvinism as unjust and oppressive malevolences rather than a material force of the ruling class designed to reap super profits and keep the class divided. They feel so badly about the criticisms because they think they have failed in their moral obligation to uplift the downtrodden and oppressed. Inessas' problem was that she had a moralistic approach to the struggle against racism. That's why she could only go so far as agreeing that an error was objectively racist. For her to acknowledge her white chauvinist ideology would mean to her that she isn't a Marxist-Leninist. In the course of the struggles with her she made this clear. She said that if people were saying that she had a certain set of white chauvinist attitudes toward national minorities, then they were writing her off as a consolidated racist. This attitude shows the depth of her moralizing. Rather than looking at her concrete errors and how she has been influenced by the bourgeois ideology of white chauvinism, rather than taking a Marxist-Leninist approach to the struggle, Inessa chose to defend her white chauvinism by taking a moralistic approach to the struggle. Lying is a defense white comrades use to get out of a criticism of white chauvinism. Comrades tell half-truths and or lies in order to get out of the criticism. They relate the circumstances surrounding the error in a version no one else remembers to have been the case. I didn't say that. I said. Comrades say things they don't really mean, agree to things they don't really agree with, or say they understand the criticism when they really don't, anything to take the focus off of themselves. Sometimes comrades actually consciously lie, and sometimes they lie to themselves as well as the rest of us, as a result of selective amnesia, of course, in order to not expose their own white chauvinism and move the whole process forward. They couldn't possibly have made these errors, so they have to reconstruct the events surrounding the errors in a new version, a new error-free version. Richard is a comrade who consciously lied in order to get out of a criticism of a racist error he made. He was in a mostly black rank-and-file caucus at his plant. He and two black men in the caucus decided to run as candidates for the UAW convention. One of the black men was a former member of his, had political weaknesses, and was socially offensive to people in the plant. Richard had already been criticized by members of the Detroit Auto Fraction for his racist paternalism. He didn't struggle with the black comrade because he didn't expect anything from him. There was a black woman in the caucus who was obviously a much better candidate for the UAW convention. Richard told the members of the Detroit Auto Fraction that he had struggled with the two black men around it because he had seen the error, too, and felt that the black woman should run. Several weeks later, when he met again with the Auto Fraction and was being further criticized for his white chauvinism, he admitted that he had lied to them before. He didn't struggle with the two black men about the fact that the black woman should be run on the slate because he didn't see anything wrong with it himself. What this comrade did was to present himself as anti-racist and made the black men look like they were too hopelessly sexist to break with the error, in order to get out of the criticism of his own white chauvinism. Richard lied, defended his error. He made a choice between the struggle for multinational unity and white chauvinism. Another example of lying is a situation with Comrade Anne. Anne was being criticized for her white chauvinism. Her whole pattern of racism had been unraveled, but she didn't view it as political criticisms. She viewed herself as being under attack. So she said things she thought people wanted to hear, lied, Rather than address the criticisms honestly and draw out how her white chauvinism served to maintain a racist, paternalistic relationship between herself and the national minority comrades in Detroit. She said she agreed with criticisms but went on to make the very same errors. She never really understood the criticisms, but said she agreed so that the focus would no longer be on her. This comrade had previously presented herself as the leading anti-racist fighter in Detroit, and it held her back from being able to learn from other white comrades. Now, when her white chauvinism was thoroughly exposed, she had the opportunity to fully come to grips with it and really help others move forward. But instead she lied and acted as though she understood criticism when she really didn't. She made a choice between Marxism-Leninism and white chauvinism. Hiding out. Comrades stay quiet during the discussion, hoping no one will ever notice they're even there. Rather than coming forward and exposing their white chauvinism, comrades remain silent. Often in the face of criticisms of themselves, comrades just go limp. They seem as though they can't think of anything to say to deepen the criticism. This conspiracy of silence is likely to take place among a number of comrades during any given discussion. There'll be a few who just keep quiet, maybe even look confused in order not to be called upon to speak, a plea for liberalism. As long as the comrade next to me is silent, there's no reason why I should have to speak, or as long as I look confused, people will go easy on me. Very often, these comrades see how those who are speaking are not really dealing with the criticism because they have first-hand knowledge of the situation or know the comrades well in their past practice. But instead of stepping forward to help the comrades deepen their self-criticisms and expose the tactics used to liquidate the struggle, these comrades hide out and remain silent. They hide out because they know they will have to make a self-criticism and or be criticized for their unity with the white chauvinism of these who stepped forward. Hiding out can take the form of comrades avoiding those white and national minority comrades who have been particularly sharp in the struggle. They may have had dinner together quite frequently, visited one another, etc. But once comrades begin to play a leading role in the struggle against racism, or be sharp in criticisms, those comrades who hide out stop extending invitations to dinner, stop visiting, and avoid them like the plague. Hiding out also takes the form of comrades not raising political differences with national minorities or holding back from presenting their point of view in the struggle against white chauvinism for fear of their own white chauvinism being revealed. They'd rather ensure that their own white chauvinism is not exposed, than to struggle for what they consider to be the correct perspective. Another form of hiding out is to fail to raise with other comrades a criticism that was made in another context. For instance, a comrade travels to another city where comrades take up a struggle against his or her white chauvinism. When he or she returns to his or her city, he or she does not share with comrades there what happened. Or a comrade is criticized for white chauvinism in the context of a mass struggle but never tells the comrades in his or her circle about what happened. These comrades do this so that the struggle with them doesn't get taken up in a consistent and systematic fashion. Again, they have made a choice. This form of hiding out is similar to lying. The comrade doesn't distort what happened or lie about it, but instead doesn't talk about it at all, and hopes the truth will never get out. A similar form to this one is to only use examples that everyone knows about without deepening the self-criticisms by drawing out many other examples that would expose a comrade's whole pattern. An example of hiding out came up in Detroit at Detroit Local Center Interview Committee meeting. Dave talked about the racism and anti-working class bias that was holding people back from sharing the 18 principles of unity with national minorities. A white comrade, Mike, asked whether advanced workers should be invited to the 18-point study. Dave drew out how Mike himself had maintained a long-term friendship with an advanced black member at work but had never raised communism with him because his racist paternalism led him to believe that the black worker was only interested in talking about racism. The black worker had since joined a study group led by the Spartacist League. Mike's overt racism came to the fore when he told Dave not to preach at him. Two other white comrades were at the meeting but remained silent during the discussion. They hid out. They didn't take up Mike's overt racism and draw out examples from their own experiences of how their racist paternalism led them to not share the 18 principles with advanced national minorities they knew. It was more important to them to protect their own white chauvinism than to help Mike and the whole committee's work move forward. They ghettoized the task to Dave by leaving the struggle against white chauvinism to him and abdicated their special responsibility as white comrades to take up the struggle with other white comrades. Their hiding out expressed the choice they made. An example of the other form of hiding out spoken to earlier is in a situation with two comrades from Milwaukee, and a white comrade on the NSC. The comrade on the NSC was criticized for his racist paternalism toward two black comrades on the NSC, and particularly his paternalistic relationship with Maddie on the National Anti-Racism Task Force. The comrade postured during the meeting and made a self-criticism, but when he went home to Boston he didn't tell any of the comrades there about the criticisms and how he failed to move forward in the discussion. The two comrades from Milwaukee had been criticized by comrades on regional and national bodies about their paternalistic relationship with a black child who lives in their neighborhood. They were defensive and also didn't step forward. They, too, did not tell their comrades in Milwaukee about the criticisms. In the instance of the comrade on the NSC and the ones from Milwaukee, they made a choice between white chauvinism and Marxism-Leninism. They did not talk to their comrades locally because they knew that their circle comrades would be able to draw out clearly and sharply their whole pattern of racist practices and white chauvinism since they had a more daily knowledge of the comrades' interactions with national minorities. They hid out when they went home because they wanted to protect their white chauvinism. Posturing is one of the most common among the defenses of white chauvinism. Comrades appear to be serious about taking up the struggle against white chauvinism. They come forward and criticize very sharply other comrades who've made white chauvinist errors. Some comrades choose this particular method as their way of building up an image of being the anti-racist fighter among his or her comrades. The comrade tries to make him herself look good in front of national minorities by presenting him herself as the leader in the struggle against racism among white communists. He or she is very sharp and clear, and in fact is always consistent in speaking up about someone else's white chauvinism. But what's missing here is a genuine self-criticism. They don't speak to the unity in the own views with those of the comrade being criticized. This form of posturing says take him/her, but don't take me because I'm struggling. It says let's focus on this one comrade and maybe it won't get around to the rest of us. Left errors are likely to be made by comrades who use posturing as their main defense in protecting their own white chauvinism. They want to have the image as the leading anti-racist fighter and attack the most backward in the struggle and then disassociate themselves from those white comrades whose errors have been exposed. Another way of posturing comes in the form of self-criticism. Comrades develop a repertoire of pat answers to criticisms. They know the right slogans to say to make them appear serious about taking up the struggle. They say that I didn't recognize this national minority comrade's strengths. But when asked to speak concretely to the strengths of the national minority comrade they didn't see before but now see, they are either speechless or the shallowness of what they have to say exposes the extent of their posturing. Comrades make shallow, abstract self-criticisms and treat each incident as though it's isolated from another. 3 months ago I talked to a national minority worker who said she was interested in communism, but I never followed up. Then at another meeting, 3 days ago I called a white comrade to ask about something a national minority comrade has better knowledge of. But what about your view of national minorities, comrade? And how did that lead to your liquidation of your task to struggle with workers for communism one time and failure to both acknowledge and seek out the leadership of the other comrade? What's the unity in your view of each of them? What's your pattern of rendering national minorities invisible? Anne, a white comrade on the NSC, did a lot of posturing. Her bourgeois liberalism had her deeply engrossed in the friend of the colored people approach to the struggle against racism. She has always maintained close social and political relationships with black people and used them as her anti-racist credentials. She used her friendships with black people to show how anti-racist she was. Once struggles against racism and white chauvinism began to take place, and became the leading anti-racist fighter in Detroit, there was no way for her not to develop that image. The racism of her organization and that of the other organization in the city was being exposed. If she was to remain a friend, she had to take up the struggle against racism in such a way that would create an image for herself as the leader in the anti-racist struggle. She had to go after all those backward white folks to prove her commitment to those poor, downtrodden and oppressed national minorities. So she got herself in a position of teaching other white comrades about white chauvinism in front of her friends. Her posturing is shown clearly in a struggle that was taken up with Comrade Inessa. Comrades were struggling with Inessa around her white chauvinism and Ann participated in that struggle. But in the context of Inessa's proliferation of racist errors, she did say something that was correct. Before anyone could say anything to unite with what Inessa had said, Ann jumped right out there to criticize Inessa for her statement. Ann's thinking was that Inessa had been identified as the most backward of the white comrades in the struggle against racism. Therefore, Ann had to prove her anti-racism by criticizing anything and everything Inessa said. Ann, through her posturing, was making a left error with Inessa. She was not helping Inessa move forward. She was more concerned with her own image than taking up a genuine struggle against white chauvinism. Ann took up many white comrades' racism and for a long time was the only white comrade in the city who was doing it. The problem is that she never used her own self-criticisms to help move these comrades. And she never talked about how her views were the same as those she criticized and how she learned from the struggle with them. Her posturing was again brought out in sharp relief in relation to a black woman who came by to visit. Ann told the woman about how she and her black comrades were engaged in sharp struggle with all the racist white communists in the local center. She never talked about how the errors they made were the same as hers, and how she maintains the same white chauvinist ideology that they do. She was trying to show how she was a friend of the colored people and was struggling against the racism of other white people. In the process of Ann's posturing, it's not surprising that she made a number of racist errors with the black woman. Her racist paternalism led her to be overly familiar with the black woman. She had made certain racist assumptions about her and through her friend of the colored people approach, proceeded to act like she thought black women act. And she asked the woman a barrage of personal questions that she surely would not have asked a white woman she just met. But her assumption was that she as a white person had every right to ask a black woman whatever she wanted to. So the effect of Ann's posturing about those racist white folks was underscored by her own doing. Ann's posturing was a defense, a cover for her own white chauvinism. She was making a choice between stepping forward and protecting her white chauvinism. White flight. Comrades just out and out refused to address the criticism. This is the most overt manifestation of white chauvinism when the struggle is being taken up. The comrades feel they have been dealt with unjustly, the criticisms are unfounded, and besides, I don't have a racist thought in my head. Concrete criticisms of their white chauvinism are raised, and they arrogantly refuse to even address them. These comrades not only refuse to address the criticism, but resign from the OCIC, their local circle, their fraction, and any other tendency form. They usually raise things like unprincipled forms of struggle or incorrect process as their reasons for leaving. But they don't address the criticism made of them and then go on to show how the unprincipled methods are serving to maintain white chauvinism. They use it as a defense for their own white chauvinism and an excuse to leave. They say they have unity with the 18 points, the need for a single center, unity with their local circle, and unity with their fraction. But their white flight tells us that their real unity is with white chauvinism. Comrade Inessa, like many others, is one who fled. She was recently expelled from DSC due to her unwillingness to step forward in the struggle against her white chauvinism after 17 months of Comrades trying to help her move forward. She also recently resigned from the OC because, she said, people view her as a consolidated racist and therefore don't see her as a comrade to struggle with. But she still has unity with the OC. She went on to posture about how despite all of this, Comrades could rest assured that they would see her in the context of the mass movement. In other words, even though you all think I'm a consolidated racist, I'll show you, and when it really counts, in the mass movement, I'm still committed to socialist revolution. After this, Comrade shows severe weaknesses in understanding the centrality of the struggle against racism and the role of white chauvinist ideology. She resigns from any context for her to struggle for a correct perspective on the centrality of the struggle against racism. She resigns from any context for her to develop as a communist, and then tells us that we can rest assured that she'll be fighting as vigorously as ever for socialist revolution. What absurdity! But this is what white flight means in the real world, for all those who have left. It means that Comrades have abandoned Marxism-Leninism and the struggle for socialist revolution in defense white chauvinism.